He wasn't supposed to be there. In fact, Kim Taehyung wasn't even on the original list. A last-minute addition, an almost forgotten face in a sea of trainees with bigger names, more connections, louder voices. But sometimes, destiny whispers. And the boy from a small town in Daegu, who once played saxophone in the school band and dreamed in secret, would become one of the most beloved and mysterious voices in the world. They called him V, but nobody knew what the V really stood for. Victory? Voice? Vulnerability? Maybe it stood for all of it. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of stars, if you've ever had a dream so big, you were too afraid to say it out loud, then this story is for you. Hit that follow button, because on this channel we uncover the real human journeys behind global legends. And Kim Taehyung's story is not just about fame. It's about timing, resilience, soul, and rising even when you were never expected to. He was born Kim Taehyung on December 30th, 1995, in the city of Daegu, South Korea. But his childhood unfolded in the quiet countryside of Gyeochang County, a place far from the flashing lights of K-pop. He was the eldest of 3 children, raised by parents who worked hard to support their family. His father ran a farm and small business, and his mother took care of the home. Because his parents worked so much, Taehyung spent most of his early years living with his grandparents. It was there, in a simple house surrounded by fields, where his character was formed. Taehyung often says those early years shaped everything. His grandparents taught him patience, respect, and gratitude. Life was humble. There wasn't much money, but there was love, and that was enough. From a young age, he showed a love for music. In elementary school, he played the trumpet and violin. But it was in middle school that he fell in love with the saxophone. His father encouraged him, and Taehyung practiced every day, sometimes for hours, losing himself in the sound. That saxophone became his escape, a way to dream beyond the borders of his rural town. At the same time, he started learning how to dance. He'd walk long distances just to attend lessons. Sometimes, when money was tight, he'd walk over 10 kilometers to class. That dedication wasn't about chasing fame. It was about chasing something he couldn't quite name. A feeling, a calling. In 2011, everything changed. He wasn't even supposed to audition for Big Hit Entertainment. He had gone just to support a friend. But someone at the audition asked if he wanted to try too. Nervous but curious, he stepped up. He sang. He danced. He played the saxophone. And out of everyone in Daegu, he was the only one chosen that day. He was shocked. When he called his family, he didn't even believe it was real. Soon after, he moved to Seoul as a trainee. He was only 16 years old. The world of K-pop training was intense. Long hours, strict rules, endless practice. But he kept going. Even when he wasn't sure he'd make it. Even when he was kept a secret from the public until just before BTS debuted. In June 2013, BTS finally took the stage. And Kim Taehyung, now known as V, introduced himself to the world. His deep baritone voice, his expressive eyes, and his artistic soul quickly made him stand out. But behind the stage persona was still the quiet boy from Gyeochang. Humble, kind, and deeply introspective. As BTS grew in popularity, so did V. But he never lost his roots. He always made time for his family. He talked openly with fans. He stayed grounded. Fame didn't change who he was. It just gave him a bigger platform to be himself. He began exploring more artistic sides of himself. He started taking photos under the name Vanti, inspired by his love for art and visual storytelling. His photos captured soft moments. Trees and fog, lonely roads, quiet stairs. It was his way of showing the world how he sees it. His music, too, became more personal. With songs like Stigma, Singularity, Scenery, and Winter Bear, V shared pieces of his soul. He blended jazz, classical, and indie sounds. He wrote about love, sadness, beauty, and hope. His voice wasn't just something you heard. It was something you felt. He was born Kim Taehyung on December 30th, 1995, in the city of Daegu, South Korea. But his childhood unfolded in the quiet countryside of Gyeochang County, a place far from the flashing lights of K-pop. He was the eldest of 3 children, raised by parents who worked hard to support their family. His father ran a farm and small business, and his mother took care of the home. Because his parents worked so much, Taehyung spent most of his early years living with his grandparents. It was there, in a simple house surrounded by fields, where his character was formed. Taehyung often says those early years shaped everything. His grandparents taught him patience, respect, and gratitude. Life was humble. There wasn't much money, but there was love, and that was enough. From a young age, he showed a love for music. In elementary school, he played the trumpet and violin. But it was in middle school that he fell in love with the saxophone. His father encouraged him, and Taehyung practiced every day, sometimes for hours, losing himself in the sound. That saxophone became his escape, a way to dream beyond the borders of his rural town. At the same time, he started learning how to dance. He'd walk long distances just to attend lessons. Sometimes, when money was tight, he'd walk over 10 kilometers to class. That dedication wasn't about chasing fame. It was about chasing something he couldn't quite name. A feeling, a calling. In 2011, everything changed. He wasn't even supposed to audition for big hit entertainment. He had gone just to support a friend. But someone at the audition asked if he wanted to try too. Nervous but curious, he stepped up. He sang. He danced. He played the saxophone. And out of everyone in Daegu, he was the only one chosen that day. He was shocked. When he called his family, he didn't even believe it was real. Soon after, he moved to Seoul as a trainee. He was only 16 years old. The world of K-pop training was intense. Long hours, strict rules, endless practice. But he kept going. Even when he wasn't sure he'd make it. Even when he was kept a secret from the public until just before BTS debuted. In June 2013, BTS finally took the stage. And Kim Taehyung, now known as V, introduced himself to the world. His deep baritone voice, his expressive eyes, and his artistic soul quickly made him stand out. But behind the stage persona was still the quiet boy from Jeocheong. Humble, kind, and deeply introspective. As BTS grew in popularity, so did V. But he never lost his roots. He always made time for his family. He talked openly with fans. He stayed grounded. Fame didn't change who he was. It just gave him a bigger platform to be himself. He began exploring more artistic sides of himself. He started taking photos under the name Vanti, inspired by his love for art and visual storytelling. His photos captured soft moments. Trees and fog, lonely roads, quiet stairs. It was his way of showing the world how he sees it. His music, too, became more personal. With songs like Stigma, Singularity, Scenery, and Winter Bear, V shared pieces of his soul. He blended jazz, classical, and indie sounds. He wrote about love, sadness, beauty, and hope. His voice wasn't just something you heard. It was something you felt. In 2023, he released his first solo album, Layover. It was a quiet masterpiece, full of R&B, jazz, and soul. The album broke records, topping charts around the world. But more than the numbers, it showed who V really was. Not just an idol, but an artist. In December 2023, he began his mandatory military service. Not as a celebrity, but as a man fulfilling his duty just like everyone else. He left quietly, with gratitude and grace. Today, Kim Taehyung is more than a member of BTS. He's a storyteller, a dreamer, a boy from the countryside who became one of the most beloved artists in the world. Not through noise, but through authenticity. He once said, "I'm not swayed by ambition. I just want to be happy." And maybe that's the secret. Because in a world chasing fame, Taehyung found something more meaningful. A way to stay human. He still smiles like the boy who played saxophone for his grandfather. He still finds joy in late-night snacks, in vintage cameras, in the small things. And when he tells fans, "I purple you," he means it. Because purple means trust, love, and forever. This is Kim Taehyung. A voice. A heart. A soul you don't just hear, you feel. At the height of BTS's early global success, with the world chanting their names and every stage packed wall to wall, Kim Taehyung stood in front of thousands. Cheering, screaming, adoring fans. Lights blazed. Cameras zoomed in. His expression, perfect V-smile, the kind that lights up a stage and melts the internet. But what people didn't see was what happened after the final bow. Backstage, Taehyung often sat in silence. Not because he was tired, though he was, but because part of him felt strangely distant. Like he was living a version of himself that the world expected, playful, wild, charismatic V. But the boy inside, the quiet dreamer from Daegu, the one who used to play saxophone in a small practice room alone. That boy? He was beginning to feel lost in the noise. It's not that he didn't love the fans. He did, deeply. Their letters, their passion, their unwavering love. It meant the world. But as the concerts got bigger, the interviews more demanding, the public persona more polished, Taehyung began to feel like he was becoming two people. The public figure, and the artist still trying to make sense of the storm around him. During long nights at the dorm, after the cameras turned off, he'd often stare at the ceiling, headphones on, replaying melodies he had recorded but never released. He had ideas. So many. Songs scribbled in notebooks. Voice memos layered with emotion. But something held him back. Doubt. Fear. the pressure of expectations. Could the world really accept Kim Taehyung not as the idol but as a raw, honest artist with something personal to say? The climax of his journey wasn't one single event. It was a slow, burning realization. It began with whispers in his own mind. Am I just a face? Do people really want to hear what I have to say? Will I ever be free to create without limits? These weren't questions he could ask out loud. Not in a world where millions hung on his every word. So he wrote. He painted. He composed. Quietly. Secretly. Late at night, between tours, in hotel rooms, in quiet studios with dim lighting and no one watching. Art became his safe space. His way to breathe. And then something shifted. He began to speak through that art. There was a time in Kim Taehyung's life when he couldn't hear his own voice. Not because he wasn't speaking, but because the noise around him was too loud. Fans screaming, cameras clicking, critics dissecting every move, every facial expression, every word he said or didn't say. And yet, through it all, something inside him was growing louder. A whisper, then a murmur, then a steady voice reminding him that he didn't just want to perform. He wanted to express something real. While the world was busy turning BTS into global phenomena, Taehyung found himself drifting inward. Fame came at the cost of privacy, pressure, and the constant question. Am I just a part of the machine, or do I still have something of my own to give? He began to turn to art. Not just music, but photography, painting, classic cinema. These weren't just hobbies. They were lifelines. He started capturing moments on film, not for Instagram likes or press releases, but because they helped him see again. Through the lens of a camera, he could slow the world down. A crack in a window, a dog's yawn in the sun, the wrinkle in an old woman's hands. These images brought him peace. And in those quiet moments, Taehyung rediscovered a part of himself he'd almost forgotten. The boy who loved beauty for no reason at all. But that quiet didn't last. With every new comeback, every performance that shattered records, the expectations rose. So did the comparisons. Why doesn't V talk as much? Why does he look tired? Is he different now? Does he even want to be here? The truth was more complex than anyone could see. Behind the stage lights, Taehyung was wrestling with doubt. He would stare at the ceiling at night, wondering if his quiet nature made him seem cold. If his emotional depth made him too much. If the version of him that armies fell in love with was even real or just a fragment of something bigger. And yet, there were moments that kept him grounded. Like standing barefoot in the dance studio alone at midnight, headphones on, moving not for performance but for himself. Or watching a fan cry while listening to Stigma, knowing that his pain had made someone else feel understood. Or being in the vocal booth, closing his eyes, and letting go of what the industry expected, allowing only the truth to spill out. Taehyung realized something then. He didn't have to be loud to be powerful. He didn't have to force charisma or pretend to shine. His magic was in the way he felt. Deeply, fearlessly, unapologetically. The trembling note in his voice. The way he could shift a room's energy with a single look. The way his silences said more than words ever could. So he stopped hiding. He started writing more honestly. Not just about love or fame, but about identity, doubt, healing. And when he began working on solo material, it wasn't to prove anything to anyone else. It was a love letter to himself and to the boy he used to be. The world saw the lights, the sold-out stadiums, the perfectly choreographed performances. But what they didn't see was how many times Taehyung stood backstage with trembling hands, questioning if he truly belonged. For every award he accepted with a smile, there were nights alone in hotel rooms, staring at the ceiling, wondering why the applause didn't quiet the chaos in his chest. Fame is not a cure for fear. It amplifies everything. The love, the criticism, the pressure. And Taehyung, with all his softness and sensitivity, carried it all like a secret. He didn't scream. He didn't break down publicly. He turned it into music, into movement, into those silent moments where he'd stand still on stage before the lights hit, letting the breath catch in his throat one last time before becoming V again. There was a moment during the Wings era, a stormy time emotionally when Taehyung nearly burned out, not just from the schedule but from the identity crisis fame was pushing him into. The boy who once danced in fields with his grandmother had become a global figure, a fashion icon, a muse. But inside he missed the quiet. He missed being just Taehyung. He missed walking through markets unnoticed, eating street food without cameras, laughing without someone waiting to twist the joke. It was around this time he started journaling again. Pages filled with dreams, but also doubts, lyrics, fears, memories of his grandmother and how she would stroke his hair and tell him, "You were born for beauty, not the outside kind, but the kind that makes people feel something." He didn't fully understand that as a child. But now it began to make sense. That was the fire beneath the persona. Not popularity, not perfection, but the ability to make people feel. And when Love Yourself, tear came out, something shifted. Not just in BTS, but in Taehyung. It was the first time he felt like their music was holding a mirror up to their own lives. The pain wasn't abstract. It was theirs. The longing, the heartbreak, the self-doubt, those lyrics were him. And he poured himself into every performance like it was a final confession. His solo singularity wasn't just a song. It was a statement. He stood alone, dancing with a mask, embodying everything he had once been told to suppress. The deep timbre of his voice echoed through dark stages, and fans didn't just cheer. They felt it. The restraint, the ache, the transformation of grief into art. And slowly the world started to see, not just V, the idol, but Taehyung, the artist. The world began to notice something about Taehyung. His performances weren't loud, but they lingered. His voice wasn't the highest, but it reached the deepest. He wasn't the flashiest member, yet when he stood still, the whole stage tilted toward him. It was in that stillness that his genius lived. He didn't need to shout to be seen. He whispered with presence. And in those whispers, millions found comfort. His artistry began to take on a shape no one could ignore. It wasn't just in the music anymore. It was in the way he styled himself, refusing the rigid lines of masculinity the industry tried to draw around him. It was in the way he stood for softness, for elegance, for silence in a world addicted to noise. When the map of the Soul era began, it was no longer just about being part of a group. Each member of BTS was stepping into their own light. For Taehyung, it became a turning point. His solo track, Inner Child, was perhaps his most personal offering yet. A song written like a letter to his younger self. He sang not just with his voice, but with memory. The boy who once cried alone in his grandmother's kitchen. The boy who stayed behind while his friends left for Seoul. The boy who wondered if being different meant being left behind. He was singing to him, and through that song, healing him. It wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. Taehyung began opening up more in interviews, not in long speeches but in fragments. Moments. Honest glimpses. He spoke of loneliness, of imposter syndrome, of missing home while being on the world stage. And his fans, his precious army, understood. Because his pain mirrored theirs. He started painting again. Not for galleries but for himself. For peace. For reflection. He found joy in things most celebrities would dismiss as too quiet. Taking photos of empty streets at dawn. Sipping tea by himself on rainy days. Listening to jazz records with no phone in sight. He called it romanticizing life. But really, it was saving him. This is where Taehyung began to emerge, not just as a performer, but as a creator of moments. A curator of emotion. Someone who didn't need a spotlight to shine, because he had learned to glow from within. He crafted his image not as a brand, but as a philosophy. From the vintage filters on his photos to the melancholic strings in his solo work, everything pointed back to his inner world. A place of longing, introspection, and love for beauty in all its forms. The industry watched, unsure how to define him. But Taehyung didn't need definitions. He was already becoming what he was always meant to be. A voice for those who feel deeply, love quietly, and carry their dreams gently, like paper cranes. When BTS announced their focus on solo projects, the world paused. 7 voices, once moving in harmony, now preparing to speak individually. For Taehyung, it wasn't a departure. It was a return. To the boy who hummed jazz riffs late at night. To the young man sketching lyrics in the margins of airplane napkins. To the artist who'd spent years shaping himself in silence. His solo era wasn't rushed. It was brewed like slow tea. Thoughtful. Selective. Patient. Where others released back-to-back singles, Taehyung waited. He wasn't interested in chasing charts. He wanted to create something timeless. And so he began building an album not for popularity, but for poetry. A sonic journal. A world made of velvet and shadows, jazz clubs and longing. When Layover was finally released, it felt like a deep exhale. No glitter, no spectacle, just pure, stripped-back honesty. The music was intimate, warm, as if each track were a candlelit letter read aloud under a moonlit sky. Taehyung didn't shout through the music. He murmured, breathed, seduced, mourned. Songs like Love Me Again and Rainy Days felt like confessions, not performances. And the fans understood, because he had spent years teaching them that quiet could be powerful. The visuals weren't designed for viral fame, they were art films. Melancholic, vintage, full of stillness and small glances. He leaned into his love of French cinema, old soul records, and the kind of photography that makes you ache without knowing why. But make no mistake, this wasn't hesitation. This was control. He curated every note, every frame, every shade of blue. His art wasn't just music anymore, it was experience. A gallery of emotion. A reflection of a man who had stopped running toward approval and started walking in truth. And the most beautiful thing? He didn't abandon BTS to find himself. He brought everything they taught him into this chapter. Their work ethic, their resilience, their love for storytelling. But now it was filtered through his lens. And what came out was something rare in pop, an album that invited you closer, rather than trying to dazzle from afar. Critics praised it, but more importantly, fans connected to it in the quietest, most sincere ways. They cried, they healed, they played his songs on long drives alone. On nights they couldn't sleep. On mornings they needed a reminder to feel something real. And in those moments, Taehyung wasn't just an idol anymore. He was a companion. There comes a moment in every artist's journey when the spotlight dims. Not because they're forgotten, but because they've become something greater than fame. They become a feeling. And that's exactly what happened with Kim Taehyung. He wasn't just the man with the deep voice, the striking visuals, or the effortless fashion. He became a comfort, a memory, a reminder of gentleness, of art, of the power in simply being yourself. When people speak of him now, it's not just about the accolades, though he's had many, sold-out arenas, millions of albums, global endorsements. It's not even about the awards. It's about what he stood for. Taehyung showed a generation that softness wasn't weakness, that vulnerability wasn't shameful, that you could be quiet and still shake the world. He inspired boys to be tender. He inspired girls to trust their intuition. He inspired artists to stop chasing trends and start chasing truth. Through every era, whether in the synchronized perfection of BTS or in the poetic soloism of Layover, he carried his heart like a lantern. And through that light, others found their path. And perhaps that's the real legacy of Taehyung. Not the headlines, not the fashion covers, not even the Billboard charts, but the nights when someone was crying on their bedroom floor and scenery played in the background, making them feel a little less alone. The afternoons when a young artist watched his stage presence and thought, I don't have to be loud to be unforgettable. The quiet mornings when a fan, worn down by the noise of life, found peace in a voice that understood stillness. Even in his silence, Taehyung speaks volumes. He doesn't perform for applause. He performs for connection, for healing, for beauty. He's the kind of artist who knows that real art is never about being seen. It's about making others feel seen. And as BTS entered a new chapter, with each member exploring their own identity, Taehyung's became unmistakably clear. He wasn't chasing relevance. He was relevance. In a fast-moving world, he reminded people to pause, to breathe, to remember that the most beautiful things often bloom in quiet corners. Away from trends, away from algorithms, away from noise. He once said, "Don't be afraid, don't worry, because everything is going to be okay." It wasn't a dramatic quote, just simple, like him. But for so many, it became a lifeline. And that's what Taehyung has always been. Not a product of fame, but a protector of feeling. So when the lights go down and the curtain falls, what will remain? The truth is him. His voice, echoing in the hearts of millions. His art hanging not in museums but in memory. His soul imprinted not on charts, but in the way his fans learned to love themselves just a little more because he existed. Because Taehyung didn't just become an icon. He became a mirror. And through him, we learned that being real is the most radical thing you can do. So here's to the boy who once watched the stars from Daegu and now is one. Not because he chased the sky, but because he stayed grounded in who he truly was. And maybe that's the greatest love story he's ever written. The one between himself and the world he changed without ever needing to change who he was. There's a quiet power in someone who doesn't chase the spotlight, but ends up owning it anyway. For years, Kim Taehyung had been the enigma in the corner of the frame. The soft smile, the thoughtful gaze, the member of BTS who could steal attention without ever demanding it. But the real story of Taehyung isn't just one of talent. It's one of reclamation, of resilience, of a boy who decided that his art would speak even when words failed him. By the time BTS had become a global phenomenon, performing in sold-out stadiums, addressing world leaders, and rewriting the rules of pop music, Taehyung had already won the hearts of millions. But fame didn't change him, challenged him, because in the world's eyes he was an idol. But in his heart he was still that boy from Daegu, still the child who dreamed through windows, still the soul that wrote in silence. He had learned that being adored didn't mean being understood. And that's where the true evolution began. While others clung tightly to what made them popular, Taehyung started stripping things back. Simplicity became his rebellion, a quiet note in a world of noise. He began leaning into photography, capturing moments that felt like memories. His photos weren't flashy. They were still, honest, full of melancholy and magic. Each one was a whisper from his inner world, unfiltered, untitled, unafraid. He shared them not to impress, but to connect. That became his new compass. He began writing more music, not always for release, sometimes just for healing, for peace, for clarity. But then, something shifted. The boy who had once hesitated to speak in interviews began to share more about his family, about his grandfather, about the loneliness that can come with success. And suddenly, fans didn't just see him, they felt him. He wasn't just V, the performer. He was Kim Taehyung, the person. And this duality, this ability to exist both as a global icon and a deeply grounded human being, became his superpower. On stage, he could own the moment with a single glance, a raised eyebrow, a baritone growl that sent chills through a stadium. Off stage, he could speak softly, dress in oversized cardigans, and spend hours sketching or reading poetry. And the world began to understand something crucial. Kim Taehyung wasn't trying to be your typical star. He was building his own galaxy. Each solo project, from Singularity to Scenery to Blue and Gray, and eventually Layover, told another chapter of his soul. Blue and Gray, in particular, wasn't just a song. It was a mirror, a raw confession of sadness, of burnout, of depression that resonated with millions during the pandemic. While other artists offered distractions, V offered truth. And in that truth, people found healing. Because that's what V became. Not just an entertainer, but a healer. Not just an idol, but an artist. His first solo album wasn't designed to break charts, though it did. It was designed to be felt. The visuals were cinematic. The production was intimate. The lyrics, pure emotion. It wasn't about impressing you. It was about inviting you in, into his world, into his heart. But make no mistake, this journey wasn't smooth. Behind the scenes, there were countless battles. Songs that got scrapped. Creative differences. Doubts that crept in during late nights. The fear of not being enough. The pressure to live up to the image. The weight of a fandom that loved him but sometimes forgot he was human. But through it all, he kept showing up. He kept choosing art. He kept choosing presence. He could have coasted on fame. But he chose to go deeper. He studied jazz and soul. He pulled inspiration from Nina Simone, Chet Baker, Frank Sinatra. He didn't want to be trendy. He wanted to be timeless. And that's exactly what he's becoming. V's resolution wasn't about reaching a destination. It was about becoming someone who could finally be at peace with the journey. A man who no longer needs to shout to be heard. Who no longer needs to fit in to be accepted. Who understands that silence can be as powerful as sound. That stillness can be as loud as movement. He learned to live slow in a fast world. To savor instead of sprint. To create instead of compete. And in doing so, he gave others permission to do the same. Today, Taehyung doesn't need to prove anything. He just needs to feel everything. And when he does, magic happens. Whether it's a quiet live stream where he plays jazz records and talks about life, or a live performance that leaves the audience breathless, he reminds us that authenticity will always outshine perfection. And perhaps that's his greatest gift. He doesn't want to be the best. He wants to be real. Because in the end, that's what lasts. So if you're someone who's ever felt overlooked, misunderstood, or pressured to become something you're not, let this story remind you. The quiet ones change the world too. Not with noise, but with truth. Not by fitting in, but by standing tall in their difference. And now, here's your moment. If the story moved something in you, if it reminded you of your own dreams, your own inner voice, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel. Because here, we do more than tell stories, we decode transformation. Drop a comment and tell us, what's your voice? What do you wish the world could hear from you?